By sunrise in 1908, somewhere in Michigan, the night watchman's coat hung from the barricade rail by one damp sleeve, moving slow in the wind off the water. His oil lantern sat upright on a wooden piling out in the middle of the Huron River, glass clean, wick trimmed, metal housing still faintly warm when the foreman waded out chest deep to fetch it. There were no planks beneath that piling anymore. The spring floods had torn the center span clean out 3 weeks earlier, dropping 60 feet of timber and iron into black water that never gave it back. And there were no boat marks on the river that morning, no drag lines in the mud, no boot prints near the edge where the bridge ended, just the coat, just the lantern sitting perfect on a post with no way to reach it, and a slow weight in the foreman's chest that didn't lift. The bridge crossed the Huron River in Michigan, linking a mill town on the south bank to farming country on the north. Before the floods that April, it carried wagons, foot traffic, and the occasional automobile. It was old timber, built in the 1880s, with a single span over the deepest channel. When the spring melt hit and the rain didn't stop, the river tore the center section loose one night. By morning, there was a 60-foot gap of open water and nothing but jagged posts where the span used to be. The bridge company hired a night watchman while they figured out whether to rebuild. His name was Edward Carver. He was 41, steady, the kind of man people in Michigan called reliable. He had worked the rail yards before moving to the mill town with his wife and daughter. He knew night shifts. He didn't spook easy. His job was simple: walk the bridge approach, check the barricade, make sure no one tried to cross in the dark, and drive into the gap. His shift started at 10 every evening. He carried an oil lantern, an iron pry bar, and a tin whistle on a cord around his neck in case he needed to signal the foreman. On May 7th, he left his house after 9:30. His wife said he took his dinner pail and coat. The lantern was already lit. She watched him walk toward the bridge road, light swinging steady. That was the last time anyone on the south bank saw him standing on solid ground. But people on the north bank told a different story. 3 of them were awake past midnight. A farmer named Hollis sitting up with a sick calf. A woman named Agnes Pratt, whose husband worked nights at the gristmill and who never slept well alone. And a boy, 13, sent to fetch water because his sister had fever. All 3 said they saw Carver's light moving across the river where the bridge wasn't anymore. Hollis was leaning against his barn door, watching mist hang over the water, when he saw the lantern swinging smooth along the line where the center span used to be. It moved at walking pace 60 feet out from the south bank, right over the gap where the current ran hardest. He said the light didn't waver. It moved the way a man moves checking his footing, slow, deliberate, pausing like Carver always did when he looked down at the edge. Hollis watched it cross most of the way toward the north side, then stop. It hung there, swaying just a little, and then went out all at once. Agnes Pratt saw it from her kitchen window. She knew the look of Carver's lantern, the way it swung. She'd watched him walk his rounds plenty of times. This looked the same, except there was no bridge under that light anymore. Just air and then the river below. She watched it move across the missing span, and said later her first thought was he'd gone mad, trying to walk across on some rope the company strung up without telling anyone. But there was no rope. Nothing but empty space. The boy saw it from his yard. He'd just pumped a bucket of water when he looked up and saw the light moving where the bridge used to be. It scared him bad enough that he dropped the bucket and ran inside. His mother told him it was lantern shine on fog. He said, "No, ma'am, it was moving, and it was out where nothing should be." When the foreman came down at first light, Carver wasn't there. The barricade was intact. The pry bar lay on the ground, handle clean. Carver's coat hung from the rail, pockets empty except for a handkerchief and 3 spent matches. And out in the middle of the river, balanced on a piling, sat the lantern. The foreman waded out. The current pulled hard. The piling was slick with moss. When he reached it and took the lantern, the metal housing was warm. Not hot, but warm, the way metal gets when flame has been inside it recent. He checked the wick, trimmed neat. Oil reservoir half full. No reason the flame should have gone out. He waded back and set the lantern down. There were no planks to that piling. No rope. No ladder. The nearest timber of the collapsed span was 30 feet downstream, half sunk. The water was 8 feet deep in the channel, bottom all stone and silt. No man could have waded out without stirring mud into clouds still visible at dawn. And no boat had been there. No keel marks, no oar scratches. Nothing. By mid-morning, word had spread. Men came from the mill. Farmers crossed at the footbridge upstream. Carver's wife came, her daughter beside her, both pale. The foreman gave her the coat. She took it without speaking and walked back up the hill. The foreman kept the lantern, locked it in the bridge shed. He said he didn't want anyone touching it until they understood what happened. But no one understood. A search party formed that afternoon. 20 men, some with dogs. They started at the barricade and worked outward in lines, checking both banks, walking the approaches, looking for tracks, torn cloth, blood, anything. The dogs pulled hard toward the water at first, noses low. But when they reached the edge where the bridge ended, they stopped. All 3 of them sat down at once and wouldn't go farther. The handlers tried coaxing them, pulling the leads, offering meat. The dogs whined, ears flat, and one started digging its paws into the gravel like it was trying to back away from something it couldn't see. Men waded the shallows with long poles, probing the bottom. Others dragged hooks through deeper water near the pilings. They worked until dusk and found nothing. No body. No sign of struggle. The water was clear enough that if something had gone in, they would have seen it snagged on rocks or caught in reeds. There was nothing. That night, the foreman posted 2 men at the barricade, brothers from the mill who volunteered. He told them to watch the bridge and the river, keep the lanterns lit, and blow the whistle if anything moved. They sat on the gravel with wool blankets and hot coffee, talking low to keep each other awake. Around midnight, they heard it. A soft 2-note whistle, short. Almost like a bird call, except there are no birds that sound like that in Michigan in May, and no bird calls at midnight. It came from somewhere out over the water past the gap, maybe from the north bank or maybe from farther out. They couldn't tell. One of the brothers stood up, squinting into the dark. The other one grabbed his arm and told him to sit down. They didn't blow the whistle, they didn't move. They sat there until dawn, and when the foreman came down to relieve them, they were still sitting, shoulders tight, staring at the gap. The foreman asked if they'd seen anything. One of them said no. The other one said they'd heard something but didn't know what it was. The foreman didn't press. He just told them to go home. On the 3rd day, someone found Carver's dinner pail. It was sitting on the approach road 20 feet back from the barricade, right where he would have set it down at the start of his shift. The tin was closed, contents untouched. Cold chicken, bread, an apple. The pail wasn't there when the foreman checked at dawn on May 8th. He was sure of that. He'd walked the whole approach looking for anything Carver might have dropped. But 3 mornings later, there it was, sitting upright in the center of the road like someone had just set it down. People in Michigan started talking. Some said Carver had enemies, debts maybe, or a grudge from his rail yard days. Others said he'd been drinking, though no one had ever seen him drunk. A few said the land around that river never gave back what it took, that the bridge should never have been built there in the first place, that the old families who'd lived in the area before the mill town went up used to avoid that stretch of water after dark. Margaret Carver stopped going to the dry goods store. She stopped answering the door when neighbors came by. Her daughter took over the shopping, walking to Main Street with her head down, buying what they needed and walking straight home. People said Margaret kept Carver's coat folded on a chair in the front room, and that sometimes late at night you could see lamplight in the window, like she was sitting up waiting for him to come back. The foreman locked the bridge shed and didn't open it again. The lantern stayed inside, hanging on the nail, and he told the bridge company he wouldn't go back in there alone. When they asked why, he didn't answer. By the end of May, men in Michigan who worked the river or the mills started avoiding the bridge road after dark. It wasn't a rule anyone spoke out loud. It was just understood. If you had business on the north bank, you crossed at the footbridge upstream. If you had to check the barricade, you did it in daylight and you didn't go alone. And on nights when the fog came in heavy off the water, people on both banks swore they sometimes saw a light out over the gap, swinging slow, steady, pacing back and forth where the bridge used to be. The timeline didn't make sense from the start, and the more people tried to piece it together, the worse it got. Carver's wife said he left at 9:30 on May 7th. The foreman's wife saw a lantern moving toward the barricade around 9:45. At 11:15, a man named Porter stepped onto his porch to smoke and saw the lantern down by the bridge, moving slow along the approach. At 12:30, a woman named Iris Talbot saw it sitting still near the barricade, steady and orange through the trees. That was the last anyone on the south side saw the light. But across the river, 3 people saw it after that, and they saw it where it couldn't be. Hollis said he saw the lantern crossing the gap at 2:10. Agnes Pratt saw it around the same time. The boy, Daniel, said it was closer to 2:30. All 3 were certain it was Carver's lantern, and all 3 said it moved like a man walking his rounds, out where there was nothing but air and black water 60 feet down. The foreman tried to make it fit. He sat with a pencil and paper, writing down every sighting, trying to line them up. If Carver had been on the south approach at 12:30, and the light was crossing the gap at 2:10, that gave him an hour and 40 minutes to, what? Wade into the river? Swim? And if he'd drowned, where was the body? The current ran fast, but not so fast a man's body would vanish completely. Someone should have seen it caught in reeds or rocks by dawn, and if Carver had somehow made it across, climbed out onto pilings that weren't there anymore, then where was he now? Why had his coat been left behind? And why was his lantern sitting warm on a post with no footprints, no rope, no boat to explain it? The foreman put the pencil down. None of it fit. On May 8th, the search party went out again with more men. The foreman split them into 3 groups. One took the south bank, walking a grid from the bridge down to the bend a 1/4 mile downstream. Another crossed at the footbridge upstream and worked the north bank. The third took boats and dragged the river with long hooks, probing the deeper water near the pilings. They tied strips of cloth to fence posts and branches as they went, marking covered areas. White cloth for cleared ground, red cloth for places needing a second pass. By dusk, 30 or 40 strips flapped along both banks, and still no sign of Edward Carver. The dogs were brought out again on the second day. 3 hounds, all experienced. They picked up Carver's scent at his house, followed it to the bridge road, and pulled hard toward the barricade. But when they reached the edge where the bridge ended, they stopped cold. All 3 sat down at once, ears flat, tails low, refusing to go farther. The handler, a man named Gaines, crouched down and tried coaxing the lead dog forward. He offered meat, spoke soft, tugged the lead. The dog whined, a high, thin sound, and backed up, claws scraping gravel. The other 2 did the same. Gaines looked at the foreman and said, "They won't cross that line." "What line?" the foreman said. Gaines pointed at the ground. There was nothing visible, but the dogs wouldn't go past it. They sat in a row, maybe 10 feet back from the broken edge, and no coaxing moved them. The foreman told Gaines to try the north bank. Gaines loaded the dogs, crossed at the footbridge, and brought them down the north side. The dogs sniffed the ground, tails wagging at first. Then they hit the same invisible line, this time on the north side about 15 feet back from the water, and stopped again. One started digging fast, throwing up dirt. Gaines pulled it back. The dog lunged forward, dug again, then sat down hard and howled. Gaines told the foreman later he'd been using dogs 12 years and had never seen them act like that. They weren't scared, he said. They were confused, like they could smell him on both sides but couldn't figure out where he went. On May 10th, someone found another piece, and it made everything worse. A man named Lyle Corcoran, who worked at the grist mill, was walking the north shore checking fishing lines when he saw something tied to a low branch overhanging the water. A strip of white cloth knotted tight, flapping in the wind. He thought it was a search marker, but when he got closer he saw it was clean linen, folded once and tied with a square knot, and it hadn't been there the day before. Corcoran was sure he'd walked this exact stretch on May 9th, and there'd been no cloth. He brought it to the foreman. The foreman held it up, turning it over. The cloth was dry, even though the branch hung low enough that the rising river should have soaked it, and it smelled faintly of lamp oil. Carver used to carry a rag like this, one of the mill workers said. Kept it in his coat pocket. Used it to wipe down the lantern glass. The foreman folded the cloth and put it in his pocket. His hands were shaking. That same day, the 2 brothers who'd sat watch on May 8th came back. They were quiet, uncomfortable. The younger one finally said, "We heard it again." "Heard what?" "That whistle. The two-note one. We heard it last night around midnight, same as before. But this time it came from two places." "What do you mean, two places?" "We heard it from the north bank, out past the gap, and then maybe 10 seconds later we heard it again, closer, from the south side, like someone was answering." The older brother nodded. "Two notes, short and sharp like a signal. Once from out there, once from back near the road." The foreman told them not to come back. He said the bridge company would find someone else to sit watch, and the brothers should go back to the mill and forget what they'd heard. They left without arguing. By the end of the first week, the search had covered every inch of ground within a mile of the bridge. They'd dragged the river, walked the banks, checked the woods, inspected the collapsed span timber by timber. They'd found Carver's dinner pail, the strip of cloth, and his coat. They'd found his lantern, still warm, on a post no man could reach. But they hadn't found Edward Carver, and they hadn't found a single footprint, drop of blood, or piece of torn cloth to tell them what happened. Margaret Carver came down to the bridge one more time during that week. She brought her daughter. They stood at the barricade in silence, looking out at the gap, and then Margaret asked if she could see the lantern. The foreman said no. He said it was locked in the shed, and he didn't think it was a good idea. "It was his," Margaret said. "I filled it. I want to see it." The foreman looked at her, then nodded. He led her to the shed, unlocked the door, and stepped aside. Margaret went in alone. Her daughter waited outside, arms wrapped around herself. Margaret was inside maybe 2 minutes. When she came out, her face was pale, hands clenched so tight the knuckles were white. She didn't say anything. She just took her daughter's arm and walked back up the hill. The foreman locked the shed again and went inside to check. The lantern was still hanging on the nail, but the metal housing was warm again. Not as warm as that first morning, but warm enough that when he touched it, his palm came away damp with sweat. He locked the door and didn't go back in. By mid-May, people in Michigan near the river started changing their routines. Men who used to walk the bridge road at night to get to the mill started taking the long way around, crossing at the footbridge upstream even though it added 20 minutes. Families on the north bank started locking doors earlier, pulling curtains shut, telling children not to go near the water after dark. No one said why. No one had to. The older men, the ones who'd lived in the area before the mill town went up, started talking in low voices. They said the stretch where the bridge stood had always been strange. They said the current ran wrong there, that things going into the water didn't always come out downstream the way they should. They said the old families used to avoid that spot, wouldn't fish it, wouldn't camp near it, wouldn't cross it after sunset even when the bridge was whole. One of them, a man named Horace Drummond, told the foreman flat out, "You won't find him. That river keeps what it takes." The foreman asked what he meant. Drummond just shook his head and walked away. On the night of May 14th, a week after Carver disappeared, the foreman went down to the bridge alone. He didn't tell anyone. He took a lantern, not Carver's, a different one, and walked the approach slow, checking the barricade, the rope, the posts. Everything was in place. The night was clear, no fog, and the moon was bright enough to see the gap, the water below, the line of pilings sticking up like broken teeth. He stood at the edge and looked out at the post where Carver's lantern had been found. Just a post. Just timber sticking up out of the current. And then he heard it. 2 notes. Short. Sharp. Like a whistle or a bird or something in between. It came from across the gap, somewhere on the north bank, faint but clear. The foreman stood very still. 10 seconds later, he heard it again. Closer this time. Behind him, back toward the road. He turned around slow, lantern raised, and saw nothing. Just the road. Just the trees. Just the empty gravel leading back toward town. He walked back up the hill faster than he'd walked down, and he didn't look back once. By the 3rd week of May, the search had stopped being a search and started being something else. A ritual, almost. Something people in Michigan did because stopping felt worse than continuing even when they knew there was nothing left to find. Every morning, men gathered at the bridge, Not as many as the first week. Some had gone back to the mill, back to their farms, back to the rhythms of work that couldn't wait. But enough. 10, sometimes 12. They brought rope, marking stakes, long poles with hooks on the end. They walked the same ground they'd walked the week before, and the week before that, checking the same bends in the river, the same stretches of shoreline, the same dense patches of scrub where a body might have washed up or been dragged by animals. They didn't talk much anymore. The conversation had run dry. All the theories had been said out loud, all the questions asked and left unanswered. They just walked, slow and methodical, eyes on the ground. And every so often someone would stop and crouch down to look at something. A scrap of cloth, a piece of wood, a stone that caught the light wrong, and then stand back up and keep walking, because it was never what they were looking for. The foreman organized them into grids, same as before. He marked sections with stakes driven into the ground and tied cord between them so they could walk in straight lines and not miss anything. He assigned 2 men to each section. No one walked alone anymore. That rule had come in quiet, unspoken, but it was ironclad now. 2 men, never one. Even in daylight, even in sections they'd already cleared twice. On May 22nd, they dragged the river again. They borrowed a 3rd boat from a fisherman upstream and worked in a line, dragging heavy iron hooks through the water, pulling them slow across the bottom, feeling for anything that snagged. They covered the stretch from the bridge down to the bend, then worked their way back up. The hooks brought up timber from the collapsed span, twisted pieces of iron bracing, stones, clumps of weed, and once, a leather boot so old and rotted it fell apart when they tried to pull it into the boat. It wasn't Carver's boot. The foreman checked. Carver's boots had been oiled, well kept, with brass eyelets and new laces. This boot was ancient. The leather cracked and green with mold, the sole half gone. Someone said it probably came from the old bridge, the one that had stood on the same site back in the 1860s before it washed out. Someone else said it didn't matter where it came from and they should throw it back. They threw it back. That same afternoon, one of the younger men, a mill worker named Thomas Archer, found something that made everyone stop. He was walking the north bank, checking the reeds near the water, when he saw a piece of paper wedged into the split trunk of a willow tree that leaned out over the river. The paper was folded once, clean, dry despite the damp air. He pulled it out carefully and unfolded it. It was a note. 4 words written in pencil in a steady, slanting hand. Check the fence line. Archer brought it to the foreman. The foreman held it up to the light, turning it over. The paper was ordinary, the kind you'd tear from a ledger or a notebook. The pencil was soft graphite, the kind workmen carried. The handwriting was clear, deliberate, no smudging, no water damage. One of the older men, a carpenter named Millard, who'd known Carver from the rail yard days, looked over the foreman's shoulder and went still. "That's his writing," Millard said. The foreman looked at him. "You sure?" "I'm sure. I've seen him mark lumber orders, sign timesheets. That's Ed Carver's hand." The group went quiet. Someone asked when the note could have been left. Archer said he didn't know. He'd walked that same stretch of bank 3 days earlier, and the note hadn't been there. He was certain. He'd leaned against that exact tree to rest, and there'd been nothing in the split trunk. The foreman folded the note and put it in his pocket. He told the men to check the fence line, the property line that ran along the north edge of the bridge company's land, marked with wooden posts and old barbed wire. 6 men went. They walked the line from one end to the other, checking every post, every tangle of wire, every place where something might be hidden or hung or left behind. They found nothing, but 2 of the men said that when they reached the midpoint of the fence line, the section that ran closest to the river, they heard that sound again. The 2-note whistle. Faint, like it was coming from far off, or from underground. They stopped walking and listened. One of them said it came from the direction of the water. The other said no, it came from behind them, back toward the road. They stood there for a full minute, not moving, and then it came again. 2 short notes, clear enough that both men heard it, but impossible to pin down where it started. They didn't finish walking the fence line. They came back to the group and told the foreman they were done for the day. That evening, The foreman sat in his kitchen with the note spread flat on the table in front of him. His wife stood behind him, arms crossed, looking down at the paper. "Ed Carver wrote that," the foreman said. "When?" his wife said. "I don't know, before he disappeared or after." The foreman didn't answer. He didn't know how to answer. The note hadn't been there 3 days ago. Archer was a careful man, not the type to miss something that obvious. And the paper was clean. No mud, no water stains, no sign it had been sitting outside for 2 weeks. It looked like it had been folded and placed in that tree trunk the same day Archer found it. But Carver had disappeared on May 7th. It was May 22nd now. 15 days. If Carver had written the note before he disappeared, why leave it in a tree on the north bank when his post was on the south side? And if he'd written it after, if he'd somehow survived, somehow crossed the river, somehow been alive and moving around for 2 weeks without being seen, why not come home? Why not speak to someone? Why leave a note that said, "Check the fence line," and nothing else? The foreman folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. He didn't show it to Margaret Carver. He didn't show it to the bridge company. He kept it close, and at night he took it out and read it again by lamplight, trying to make sense of handwriting that looked exactly like a man who'd been gone for more than 2 weeks. By the end of May, people in Michigan had stopped hoping they'd find Edward Carver alive. Some had stopped hoping they'd find him at all. The talk in town shifted. It wasn't about where he might be anymore. It was about what had happened to him, and why, and whether it was something that could happen again. Some said he'd had enemies. A man from the rail yards, maybe. Someone who'd followed him to the mill town and waited for the right moment. Others said it was simpler than that. He'd slipped, fallen into the river in the dark, and the current had taken him so far downstream that he'd never be found. A few said he'd run off, left his wife and daughter, started over somewhere else, but no one who knew Carver believed that. He wasn't the type to run. And then there were the ones who didn't say much out loud, but whose eyes went distant when the bridge came up in conversation. The ones who walked faster past the barricade at dusk. The ones who told their children not to play near the river, not to go down to the water alone, not to answer if they heard someone calling their name from the far bank. The ones who remembered what the old families used to say about that stretch of river, and who were starting to think maybe the old families had been right. On the 1st of June, the foreman went back to the bridge shed to check on the lantern one more time. He hadn't opened the shed in over a week. He didn't like going in there, but the bridge company had written asking for an inventory of tools and equipment, and the lantern was technically company property. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was stale, close, smelling of dust and old wood. The lantern hung on the nail where he'd left it, glass clean, wick trimmed, reservoir still half full of oil. The foreman reached up and touched the base of the lantern. It was warm, not hot, not burning, but warm, the same faint warmth it had carried the morning they'd found it on the post in the river. He pulled his hand back fast, heart hammering in his chest. He looked around the shed. The door had been locked. The window was shut, boards nailed across it from the outside. No one had been in here. No one could have been in here. He backed out of the shed, locked the door, and walked away. He didn't put the lantern on the inventory list. He didn't mention it to the bridge company. He just locked the door and left it there, hanging in the dark, warm for no reason he could name. By mid-June, the bridge company decided not to rebuild. They posted notices on both banks saying the bridge was condemned, the road closed permanently, and all traffic should use the footbridge 2 miles upstream. They sent a crew to dismantle the approach ramps and salvage what timber they could from the collapsed span. The foreman supervised the work. It took 4 days. When they were done, there was nothing left but the pilings sticking up out of the water and a flat stretch of gravel where the south approach used to be. The workers didn't like the job. They didn't say why, but the foreman could see it. They worked fast, not talking much, and when dusk started coming on, they packed up their tools in a hurry and left without waiting for the foreman to dismiss them. One of them, a young man named Perry, asked on the second day if it was true that the night watchman had disappeared. The foreman said yes. Perry asked if they'd ever found him. The foreman said no. Perry didn't ask anything else after that, but he stopped working alone. Even when his task was simple, stacking boards, pulling nails. He stayed close to the others. On the last day of the dismantling, the foreman found something in the gravel near where the barricade used to stand. It was a tin whistle on a cord, the kind Carver had worn around his neck. The foreman picked it up. The whistle was clean, no rust, no dirt. The cord was frayed at one end, like it had been cut or torn. He blew into it once softly. It made a sound. 2 short notes, clear and sharp. The men working nearby stopped what they were doing and looked at him. No one said anything. The foreman put the whistle in his pocket and told the crew they were done for the day. That night he went home and put the whistle in a drawer in his kitchen. He didn't blow it again. He didn't show it to anyone. But sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, he swore he could hear it. 2 short notes, faint and far away, like someone was answering a call he hadn't made. Years passed, and Edward Carver never came home. Margaret and her daughter left the mill town in fall 1908, 6 months after he disappeared. They moved to her sister's place near Ann Arbor and didn't come back. The house stayed empty for a while, then was rented to a family from Ohio who didn't know the story. When they heard it, and everyone heard it eventually, they stayed but kept curtains drawn on the side facing the river and didn't let their children play past the end of the street. The bridge was never rebuilt. The pilings stayed where they were, sticking up out of the water like markers for something no one wanted to remember. By 1910, most of the approach roads had grown over. The footbridge 2 miles upstream became the only crossing. The mill town didn't grow the way people thought it would. Families started leaving, businesses closed, and by 1915 the population had dropped by 1/3. People in Michigan didn't talk about Edward Carver much after the first year, but they talked around him. They talked about the bridge, the river, and the rules that had come out of that spring in 1908. And the rules were strict. No one worked the riverbank alone after dark. If you had to check a boat, move a line, pull a net, you took someone with you. 2 men, never one. If you were walking the old bridge road and dusk started coming on, you turned back. Even in summer, when daylight stretched long, people in Michigan made sure they were clear of that stretch before the sun touched the horizon. Parents told their children not to go near the old bridge site. They said it wasn't safe. The pilings were unstable. The current was strong. They didn't say the rest out loud, but the children learned anyway. They learned from the way adults went quiet when the bridge came up. They learned from the way no one fished that stretch, even though the water was deep and the fish were thick. They learned from older kids who dared each other to walk down to the gravel flat and always turned back before they got close. The foreman stayed until 1912, then took a job farther north. Before he left, he went back to the bridge shed one last time. The door was still locked. The key was still in his pocket. He opened it in broad daylight with 2 other men standing outside and stepped inside. The lantern was gone. The nail was still there, driven into the beam where he'd hung it. But the lantern wasn't. The shed hadn't been broken into. The lock was solid, the door intact, the window still boarded shut. He checked the floor, the corners, the shelves. Nothing. He asked if anyone had been in the shed. They said no. He asked the bridge company if they'd sent someone to retrieve it. They said no, they'd written off the equipment years ago. He didn't tell them the lantern was missing. He just locked the shed, handed the key to the mill supervisor, and left town 3 days later. In 1916, a crew came to clear the old bridge pilings. They brought a barge, heavy chains, and a steam winch. The work went smooth for 2 days. On Wednesday, they reached the piling where the foreman had found Carver's lantern, the one in the middle of the current. They wrapped chains around it, hooked it to the winch, and started pulling. The piling didn't move. They added more tension. The wood groaned, the chains went tight, and then one link snapped with a crack like a gunshot. The chain whipped back across the barge, missed one man's head by inches, and cracked the steam housing. They tried again the next day with a heavier chain. Same result. The foreman said the piling must be sunk deeper than the others, maybe wedged into bedrock. He said they'd come back with better equipment. They never did. The county abandoned the job and the piling stayed. By 1920, the old bridge site had become one of those places people in Michigan drove past without stopping. There was no reason to stop. No houses nearby, no fishing access, just a flat stretch of riverbank. A line of weathered pilings and a feeling most people didn't want to name. But every few years, someone reported seeing a light out on the water at night. It was always the same. A single light, orange and steady, moving slow across the gap where the bridge used to be. It never lasted long, a minute, maybe two, and then it was gone. People who saw it called it swamp gas, or a lantern from a boat catching the angle wrong, or headlights reflecting off mist. People in Michigan didn't argue. They just stopped going down to that stretch after dark and made sure their children did the same. In 1931, a man named Carl Dietrich bought property on the North Bank, half a mile from the old bridge site. He built a house, ran a small farm. He didn't know the story when he moved in. By the end of his first year, he knew it well. He told people in town he'd heard the whistle, 2 short notes, clear and sharp, always around midnight, always from the direction of the river. He said he'd gone out looking once, walking down to the bank with a lantern and a dog. The dog stopped at the same invisible line the search dogs had stopped at in 1908 and wouldn't go farther. Dietrich tried pulling the lead. The dog sat down, ears flat, and started whining. Dietrich gave up and went home. He heard the whistle 3 more times that year. After that, he stopped going outside after 10 o'clock. In 1945, a group of teenagers drove down to the old bridge site on a dare. It was late October, the night before Halloween. They parked on the gravel flat, built a fire, and sat around drinking beer and telling the story the way teenagers do, half mocking, half serious. Around midnight, one of them saw the light. It was out on the water, moving slow across the gap, swinging like someone was carrying it. The group went quiet. Someone said it was a boat. Someone else said there was no boat. They watched the light travel from the south side toward the north, steady and deliberate, and then it stopped. It hung there, right over the middle of the current, and then went out. No one said anything. They put out the fire, got in the car, and drove back to town. One of the boys said later that when the light went out, he heard something. 2 short notes, faint but clear, like a whistle. He said it came from right behind him, close enough that he felt it in his chest. But when he turned around, there was no one there. The group didn't go back. And when people in Michigan heard what they'd seen, no one acted surprised. They just said the kids were lucky they'd stayed in the car. By the 1950s, the story had settled into the bones of the place. It wasn't something people talked about with strangers, but it was there, solid and real, passed from parents to children, from old hands to new workers, from one generation to the next. And the rules held. If you lived near the river, you didn't walk the bank alone after dark. If you had to cross to the north side, you used the footbridge upstream before sunset. If you heard a whistle at night, 2 short notes, clear and deliberate, you didn't answer. You didn't go looking. You went inside, locked the door, and waited for morning. In 1963, a salvage crew tried one more time to pull the pilings. They brought modern equipment, hydraulic winches, cutting torches. They cleared 6 pilings in 2 days. On the 3rd day, they reached the one in the middle. They wrapped heavy cable around it, hooked it to the winch, and pulled. The piling shifted slightly, and then the winch motor seized. Smoke poured from the housing, and the cable went slack. The foreman said it was mechanical failure, bad maintenance, nothing to do with the piling. But the crew didn't want to try again. They packed up and left. The county marked the remaining pilings as navigation hazards and let them be. And in fall 1967, nearly 60 years after Edward Carver disappeared, a woman walking her dog along the north bank found something in the reeds. It was an oil lantern. Old, but intact. The glass was clean, the wick trimmed, the metal housing free of rust. She picked it up and felt the base. It was warm, not hot, not burning. Just warm, the way metal gets when it's been sitting in the sun. Except it was October, and the sun had been down for an hour, and the lantern had been sitting in cold reeds under shadow. The woman brought it to the county sheriff. The sheriff looked at it, asked where she'd found it, and put it in a storage room at the station. He didn't file a report. He didn't log it. He just put it on a shelf and closed the door. 2 weeks later, the lantern was gone. The sheriff said someone must have taken it, though the room had been locked and he was the only one with a key. He didn't look for it. He just let it go. People in Michigan still see the light sometimes. Not often, maybe once a year, maybe less. But it's always the same. A single light, steady and orange, moving slow across the gap where the bridge used to be. And when people see it, they don't stop. They don't investigate. They just keep driving, keep walking, keep their eyes ahead. Because there are 3 versions of what happened to Edward Carver in spring 1908. The first version is human. Someone killed him, an enemy from the rail yards, a debt, a grudge. They dumped his body in the river and the current took it far downstream. The lantern, the coat, the whistle, the note, all staged, or coincidence, or misremembered. The second version is natural. Carver slipped in the dark, fell into the water, drowned before he could cry out. The current pulled him under, wedged him into rocks or submerged timber, and he's still there somewhere, buried in silt. The rest, the warm lantern, the light crossing the gap, the 2-note whistle, is people wanting mystery where there's only tragedy. The third version is the one nobody in Michigan says out loud, but everybody knows. Something was out there that night, something that moved across the gap where no man could walk. Something that called in Carver's voice or with Carver's whistle, and when he answered, he crossed into a place the rest of us can't follow. And whatever took him is still there, pacing back and forth where the bridge used to be, carrying a light that never goes out and waiting for the next person who'll walk too close, listen too hard, answer when they shouldn't. Which version makes sense? Which version explains a lantern still warm on a post no one could reach, a note written in a dead man's hand 2 weeks after he disappeared, a light that moves across empty air while people on both banks watch and say nothing? And why do people in Michigan still follow rules made almost 100 years ago? Rules their grandparents followed and their great-grandparents made. Rules that say don't walk alone, don't cross after dark, don't answer. If you hear that whistle calling from the water, subscribe so you don't miss the next story.